Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for the week ending in February 28th, 2025. We are here with Joss, Jose, and me, Arianne. First, a summary of the news. A Montana court blocks the state sex binary law. Wisconsin governor accused of erasing the word mother. UVA half-heartedly phases out pediatric gender transition. A federal court censures trans rights attorneys in a judge shopping case. Lesbian firefighters murdered in a domestic violence case. Secret school transitions are okayed in Massachusetts. And Stonewall struggles amidst a decline in financial support. We shall start with judicial-related news. On February 18th, Montana District Court Judge Leslie Halligan blocked a state law that declared that sex is binary. The law in question, Senate Bill 458, was passed in 2023 and defined male and female in terms of genetics and gamete production. Judge Halligan said the law violated Montanans' guarantee of equal rights and privacy. Plaintiffs include trans-identifying, intersex, and two-spirit individuals who claim that the law, quote, excludes them from the definition of human beings, unquote, because they claim they do not fit on the male-female sex binary. The substance of the argument revolved specifically around intersex individuals. The judge agreed with two intersex plaintiffs that they had a mix of male and female biology at birth, and hence their existence was not acknowledged by the law. By not being part of the only two legally acknowledged sexes, the plaintiffs argue that it's impossible for them to have legal rights against discrimination on the basis of sex. Hence, the argument follows, they are directly harmed by the law. The Attorney General of Montana is planning on appealing the decision. When I first heard about this decision, I thought it was ridiculous. However, upon further analysis of the case, I have to confess that the drafters of Montana's sex binary law did indeed leave some vulnerabilities in their legislation. To be clear, intersex individuals are not a third sex. They are still male or female biologically. However, Montana's law as written is indeed ambiguous about how to classify individuals with certain DSDs or intersex conditions, including complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, where individuals have female external genitalia and hormone levels despite having XY chromosomes and not producing large gametes. Montana's law reads, quote, female means a member of the human species who, under normal development, has XX chromosomes and produces or would produce relatively large, relatively immobile gametes or eggs during her life cycle and has a reproductive and endocrine system oriented around the production of those gametes. An individual who would otherwise fall within this definition, but for a biological or genetic condition, is female, unquote. And there is a parallel definition for male. While the second sentence of these clauses do allow for DSDs, it does not clarify whether gamete and genetics should take precedence over the endocrine system or vice versa, when classifying people as male or female. Hence, I could see hair-splitting lawyers and judges taking advantage of this ambiguity, which is what happened in the case in Montana. Policymakers, please do your homework. Gender ideology is a well-funded machine, and you cannot afford to give away even an inch of ground in the fight against it. Make sure your laws are ironclad and crystal clear. And there's more news about legislative ambiguity in Wisconsin. Social media went ablaze with the claim that Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers is backing legislation that scraps the term mother and instead says inseminated person. These changes provoked outcry, including from Republican State Senator Mary Felskowski, who issued a statement saying, quote, it is disgusting to see the Evers administration attempt to erase mothers and fathers. It is becoming clear the governor not only wants the government to raise children, as we learned in the State of the State address, but that he wants to erase the concept of mom and dad altogether. The continued attempts by the left to erase women at the institution of marriage and the family unit are just more proof of how out of touch the Democrats are with the majority of Americans, unquote. So what's going on here? Well, Governor Evers is indeed backing a bill, SB 45, which is a proposed budget bill. And this budget bill does replace the word mother with inseminated person on page 1766 in a section involving artificial insemination. And to be honest, I can see why, because there could be, I guess, cases where a female same-sex couple is using artificial insemination and both could be referred to as mothers, so clarity is needed about which is the one actually getting pregnant. There are far more examples where mother and father are replaced with parent. For example, page 726 says, the parent who gave birth to the child. Pages 86 to 88 include a section explaining the switch to more gender-neutral terminology. It says that the switch was motivated by the need to be inclusive of same-sex couples, who can be legal parents of children. The bill also replaces husband and wife with spouse for similar reasons, namely that same-sex marriage is legal. So as far as I can tell, gender ideology was not the primary motive for making these language changes, although it should be noted that the bill in several occasions does contain protections for gender identity. It should also be noted that there are sections where mother and father are retained, and the section on gender-neutral terminology acknowledges this. In other words, while there is some kernel of truth to the online rumors that Governor Evers is quote-unquote erasing mothers, the reality is more complicated. Now, we are curious to hear your thoughts. Do you think the governor-backed bill goes too far in political correctness with language? Or do you think these changes are justifiable updates to be more accommodating for LGB couples? Let us know in the comments. Meanwhile, the effects of Trump's executive order defunding pediatric transition continues to ripple. On February 21st, the University of Virginia Board of Visitors announced it will no longer be treating new patients for pediatric gender transition. That is, it will not be treating minors who wish to transition. Sounds good, right? Well, not so fast. UVA said they will continue to treat minor patients that are already in the process of transition. Second, they will refer new patients to private clinics while gradually moving their existing pediatric gender patients to private practice as well. In other words, UVA seems to be trying to skirt around Trump's executive order defunding pediatric transition. They want to appear to be in compliance with the order and claim federal tax dollars while still facilitating the transition of minors. To make matters worse, as the LGBT Courage Coalition points out, private healthcare providers have less oversight than public universities. So we may be seeing many pediatric gender patients essentially being pushed off the books into the shadows of private practice where God knows what may be going on. So while Virginia's Republican Governor Youngkin is declaring this a win in the fight to protect children, in fact, the fight is only getting started until legislation seriously addresses this issue. So what have you got, Joss?
Thanks, Arianne. Today, I'll start with a case about judge shopping. U.S. District Judge Lyles C. Burke has sanctioned attorneys Melody Egan, Jeffrey Doss, and Carl Charles for attempting to manipulate case assignments, a practice commonly referred to as judge shopping, and for providing misleading testimony under oath. The case originated in April 2022 when two separate lawsuits were filed challenging Alabama's law banning gender care for minors. The first lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of Alabama, while the second was filed in the Middle District. The legal teams involved sought to have their cases assigned to judges they perceived as more favorable by marking them as related to previous cases, thereby attempting to influence the random case assignment process. Judge Burke's comprehensive 230-page order, issued on February 25, 2025, detailed the misconduct of the attorneys involved. He publicly reprimanded Egan and Doss, disqualified them from continuing to serve as lawyers in the underlying litigation, and referred their cases to the Alabama State Bar for further review. Carl Charles faced additional sanctions due to, quote, repeated intentional bad faith misrepresentations, unquote, during the inquiry. Judge Burke imposed a $5,000 fine on Charles and referred the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Alabama for potential criminal investigation, noting that, quote, willfully testifying to falsehoods, that is, perjury, can carry a criminal penalty, unquote. In response to the sanctions, the spokesperson for Lightfoot, Franklin, and White, the Birmingham-based firm representing Egan and Doss, stated that they disagreed with the decision, were evaluating their options, and, quote, stand by these fine lawyers, end quote. This case highlights the judiciary's commitment to maintaining the integrity of the legal process and serves as a cautionary tale against attempts to undermine the impartiality of judicial proceedings. Moving now to a tragic story. California fire captain Rebecca Becky Marody was the victim of an alleged domestic violence homicide at the hands of her wife, Yolanda Marody, also known as Yolanda Olnazak. Police were called to the couple's home around 9 p.m. Monday, February 17th. On surveillance video from the home, Yolanda can be seen chasing Becky around the patio with a knife. Later, Yolanda can be seen gathering belongings and pets, loading up her vehicle, and driving away. Apparently, Yolanda texted a friend to say Becky was going to leave her and that she snapped. This is not the first time Yolanda has been accused of murdering a spouse. In October 2000, Yolanda fatally stabbed her then husband, James Joseph Olnazak, and attempted to flee with their children. She was convicted of voluntary manslaughter in 2003 and sentenced to 13 years, 8 months in prison, but served only 9 years, 10 months before being released in November 2013. Yolanda's vehicle was spotted crossing into Mexico less than an hour after she fled the scene of her vicious crime in Ramona, California. Becky was just 49 years old and served 30 years with CAL FIRE, primarily in Riverside County, but she also served in San Bernardino and San Diego counties. Becky started her career as a volunteer firefighter in '93 and became captain in 2022. She was planning to retire from the fire department later this year. Becky was the primary caregiver for her 77-year-old mother who also lived with Becky. There is a benevolent fund established in Becky's name by CAL FIRE San Diego to cover funeral expenses and her mother's continued care. The fund will be linked in our story notes. I'll leave you with this statement from her friend and coworker of 30 years, John Klingsmith. He says, as we age in our career, we have a saying that we get salty as we get older, but that was never Becky. She was always looking out for everyone. You always knew that if you had a shift scheduled with her, that it was going to be a great day no matter what. Now to news from Massachusetts. Glenna Goldust brought us this case to our attention on X. The First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston gave the green light to secret school transitions this week, and apparently the judges waited 17 months after hearing arguments to issue their ruling. They also didn't identify which of the 3 judges authored the ruling. From the website Justia US Law, the case involves parents of a student at Baird Middle School in Ludlow, Massachusetts, who challenged the school's protocol regarding the use of a student's requested name and gender pronouns without identifying the parents unless the student consents. The parents argued that this practice interfered with their parental rights under the US Constitution. The school defended the protocol as necessary to ensure a safe and inclusive environment for students. It's worth mentioning that the student was 11 years old at the time the secret transition took place, and the court used they-them pronouns when referencing the young girl. Glenna notes, quote, the parents argued that social transition is a mental health intervention. They briefed this meticulously. Court rejects the argument because any idiot can use a pronoun. The parents argue they shouldn't. Any idiot can stick you with a needle. That doesn't make it trivial, unquote. The first time this complaint was heard, and the results of the appeal were very similar in that the courts decided the school's actions, including the use of the student's chosen name and pronouns, did not constitute medical treatment, and that the protocol did not restrict the parent's right to direct their child's upbringing. But Glenna notes the court's bias when focused on safety and inclusivity. The court indicates social transition is good for quote-unquote transgender students, and it seems to arrive at the conclusion from reading previous court decisions, not by analyzing studies. Glenda states that trans activists scored a lot of legal wins before gender-critical lawyers got in gear, and now those daffy opinions haunt us. Now to you. Jose?
Thanks, Joss. We move to news from the UK. Long discredited former gay rights charity Stonewall could be facing significant staff cuts with up to half of its workforce at risk, according to insiders. This revelation was made by the charity's chief executive, Simon Blake, during an internal Teams call. Employees were informed that only positions with dedicated funding would be secure as part of a restructuring effort. Insiders speculate that this move is linked to policy decisions made by former US President Donald Trump regarding foreign aid. Blake had previously warned about the impact of Trump's policies on Stonewall's operations. The Stonewall has received over £500,000 in the past 3 years from the Global Equality Fund, a public-private partnership administered by the US State Department. However, the fund has been criticized for its lack of transparency, having not published accounts since 2015. Despite this, many argue that Stonewall's financial troubles predate Trump, as US contributions represent only a small fraction of the organization's nearly £7 million annual income. A more pressing issue for Stonewall has been the mass exodus of organizations from its diversity champion scheme. Many have realized that Stonewall's guidance often reflects its preferred interpretation of the law rather than actual legal standards. Additionally, income from private donations has been steadily declining. The charity's 2023-2024 financial report revealed a deficit of £858,000. Public institutions have also distanced themselves from Stonewall, recognizing that disciplining employees for not adhering to its stance can lead to costly and reputation-damaging employment tribunals. Once a respected champion of gay rights, Stonewall has undermined its credibility by aggressively promoting transgender activism, often at the expense of the very community it once served. The turning point came in 2015 when the charity shifted its focus from lesbian and gay rights to advocating almost exclusively for transgender issues. Since then, Stonewall has lobbied corporations and public bodies to recognize gender identity over biological sex and has pushed for pediatric gender transitioning as a form of life-saving medical care. This has alienated many within the lesbian and gay community who feel that their rights have been sidelined. Stonewall has even labeled lesbians as sexual racists for refusing to consider trans-identified males as potential partners. Public sentiment appears to be shifting against trans activism. A recent YouGov poll in the UK, the fourth in a series dating back to 2018, shows growing skepticism towards transgender rights across all demographics, including groups typically more sympathetic to trans causes. In the US, a new Pew Research Center survey published just 2 days ago found that the majority of Americans support policies such as requiring trans athletes to compete in categories that match their biological sex, that has a 66% of approval, and banning gender transition treatments for minors with a 56% of approval. Polling data also suggests that Trump's approach to LGBTQ+ issues, which has focused heavily on transgender policies, is among the most widely supported aspects of his administration. An ABC analysis of all publicly available polls as of February 25th found that his stance on LGBTQ issues enjoys stronger backing than nearly any other issue besides inflation. Since he has focused almost entirely on transgender issues, this supports the claim that gender identity is widely unpopular and did more to elect Trump than any other issue besides inflation. Lesbian lawyer Glenna Goldis suggested that Stonewall is using Trump as a scapegoat to distract from its financial failures, particularly the millions lost in revenue from public and private sector partnerships over the past 4 years. The shift in public opinion may also explain why LGBTQ organizations beyond Stonewall UK are struggling. For example, the Stonewall National Museum, Archives, and Library an esteemed institution in South Florida's LGBTQ community, is experiencing an unprecedented decline in support. Traditionally, its annual Standing on the Shoulders of Heroes Gala sells out. However, this year's event, set for March 1st, is facing a significant shortfall in ticket sales. The executive director, Robert Keston, attributes this downturn to a broader withdrawal of financial backing for DEI and so-called woke initiatives. As federal and state funding dries up, LGBTQ organizations that rely on these sources find themselves in jeopardy. Private corporations and companies, once reliable allies, are also severing ties, leaving many long-established institutions at crossroads. Stonewall's decline serves as a cautionary tale of how overreach and ideological rigidity can alienate even core supporters. As the political and cultural landscape shifts, organizations that fail to adapt may struggle to survive. So what do we think?
It makes me all the more curious about the financial trail of LGBTQ. I want to know more about what percent, like if I look at other organizations throughout the world, not just the UK, but how much of that money is coming from overseas, for the LGBTQ groups? Because I get the sense, I've heard this argument too made with like USAID, that the USAID was also funding sort of various LGBTQ things in other countries. And so I'd like to see more on patterns on who's donating to what, where, and what the trend has been over the years, because this is a very important avenue of investigation, in my opinion.
I've noticed this as well about in the news about these various LGBTQ groups laying people off and complaining that they have a funding problem. And just looking at some of the data from ProPublica about their revenues and expenses, HRC, which I think had 20% of their workforce that they laid off for 2024, this does claim that their expenses exceeded their revenues by 6 million. So there is a lot of line item stuff that we need to be looking at. I want to note also that their expenses were almost 52 million and their revenue was almost 46 million. So a revenue of 46 million is down from the previous year in 2023, but it's still like they've basically grown pretty much year over year. The point being, that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. And what are these expenses going towards? So HRC has HRC, the nonprofit NHRC Foundation, which funds other things. Just tersely looking, some of the funding was to Kamala Harris's campaign as a line item for some of these things. Their expenses for the foundation exceeded their revenues as well. So by quite a large margin. Looking at GLSEN, their expenses, their revenues were much lower than other groups like GLAAD or HRC, but their expenses also exceeded their revenues by 3 million. For GLAAD, they still made more money than they spent. So GLAAD's doing okay. GLAAD's revenue is 25 mil and their expenses were 21 mil. So deep diving on where the money is coming from and where the money is going, I think is really important when we're thinking about organizations like this, because how they spend their money is important. And I think what I notice from people generally when we talk about these major LGBTQ NGOs is that they do not feel an impact in their community. Just if you ask any lesbian, gay, or bisexual person, when was the last time you saw HRC show up for anything more than a party or at Pride with some banners or posters or stickers or whatever? The answer, it will just get crickets, because you do not see an impact in the community from these organizations.
The lack of community is a huge problem, and I'm curious to know more too about this Fort Lauderdale museum too, the Stonewall Museum there, about what they are doing, because I think museums are important and I think archives are important for history. So I wouldn't want a situation to erupt where archives and museums lose their funding and we lose a lot of history. But I can't believe that's the only thing that's going on here. And I also haven't been there. I don't know like if it's a very captured place or what. But I think I would like to see more funding dedicated to preserving history. And especially given like so much of the gay rights movement happened in like the 70s and 80s, and you know a lot of people who are alive then are getting old and aren't going to be around for that much longer. So I'd like to see funding for that.
One of the things to think about when we think about funding for museums and to preserve our history is how it's being preserved, and if it's being preserved, you know, in an honorable way and in a truthful way, or if it's being preserved in a way that is not accurate. So that's difficult to do. We know that there's, I think there's a Stonewall museum or litigation center or a combination of the two or something in California that's like the Sylvia Rivera like Stonewall hoopla bonanza. I don't know, but there's so many things that are, you know, there are these organizations and corporations even that are formed around a false narrative of gay rights. So getting the history correct really matters too. And how do we, like, we try to do the best we can as an organization to make sure our history is accurately told and to correct it when we see it falsely told. But we're like, there's a lot there's a lot of people all over the internet saying whatever they want to say and making claims that are just not accurate about gay history. So how do we get that back? Like that whole notion of like the woke capture is a accurate point, because if it's being told through a transwash narrative, then it, you know, Tim had that segment a couple of weeks back about gay history and icons from gay history just not being noticed at all from AI, because AI is generating content based off of what it's seeing on the internet pervasively told, and what the narrative is pervasively told is that trans women of color are why we have rights. So that's what AI spits back, and like this whole thing is just the Ouroboros of nonsense. So how do we preserve it accurately?
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm sure these museums and particularly this one in South Florida, they have great stuff about gay rights, like their archive, their collection. It has some really cool stuff. These things have intrinsic value, right? It's not, it's really not fair that we can only keep them, how can I say this, if it's contingent on also supporting gender identity, you know? And what sucks is that once public opinion shifts on gender identity, we also have these things, these gay rights history pieces threatened. So it's just frustrating.
Yeah, I agree. It really is frustrating. The whole thing is really frustrating. Our history is important, and an accurate telling of our history is important. So it's sort of incumbent on all of us, and this is just a nod to our group that we have coming up for Lesbian Social Club this Sunday, is to talk about items and to bring items that are reflective of things that have been important to us and culturally important to us as lesbians. So we have to sort of you know, preserve our own legacy of content as well, and our history is important.
And on that note, thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again next week. Make sure to check out our website for our schedule of upcoming events. Joss mentioned Lesbian Social Club. We have all sorts of other events. Please check that out, and see you again next week. Thank you.